Hello and welcome to the World Wanders podcast, your source for travel stories, travel destinations, and travel philosophy.
I'm Amanda.
I'm Ryan.
And we're your hosts.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by you, the fans of the show. If you go to patreon.com/theworldwanders, you can find out more about the cool bonuses and rewards we have for supporters of the show. You can sign up and get an interesting postcard from somewhere in the world or exclusive content. Just go to patreon.com/theworldwanders to find out more.
And another quick announcement before we dive into this episode of the show. We have an awesome online community that we've just started separate to our Facebook page. And we would love for all of you out there who are listening to the podcast to join us. And so you can find that on the show notes at theworldwanders.com, or you can just search World Wanders, a community for travelers, and we'll get you access. And it's lots of like-minded people who enjoy traveling the world. There's travel bloggers, digital nomads, people from all over who are just talking about all things travel. So we would love to see you there. Hello and welcome to another episode of the World Wanders podcast. Today on the podcast, we are super excited to be joined by Suzanne Rutledge, who is a fellow traveler and a fellow travel blogger. Suzanne and her husband took their young son on a trip for 9 months around the world a couple of years ago, and she's here to share that experience with us today.
Yeah, she is the author of From the Rut to the Ledge, where she tells the story of this 9-month journey around the world as a family and how it got them out of a rut and out of their comfort zone. And we had a really interesting conversation about what it's like traveling with a 7-year-old son, education while traveling, and a whole bunch of other stuff along the way.
Yeah, so without further ado, here's Suzanne. We are very excited to be joined on the podcast today by Suzanne Rutledge, who is joining us from, I actually don't know where you're joining us from, Suzanne.
Athens, Georgia.
Oh, nice. We love Athens.
Yeah, but we went there one time.
It was great, though.
I always encourage people to come to Athens. If you're flying into Atlanta, it's only an hour away, and it is a pretty cool university town. So we have excellent food, a great music scene. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely. And so, you're here to share your adventures around the world with your husband and your son. And we're so excited to be hearing about those stories. So welcome to the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, of course. And so we want to get into, what those adventures were like and the book that you've written since then about them and everything that you've learned along the way and on the road. But I think a good place to start is to back up a little bit and talk about where this idea came from to, quit your jobs and take your son on the road with you.
Yes. Well, my husband and I have always loved to travel. We started traveling as soon as we got married. We lived abroad for a few years and worked abroad before we had our son. And then just we're always looking for chances to travel internationally. And he and I were on our trip to Chile for our 40th birthdays, and we met a woman at our hotel who was traveling around the world by herself. And I had just never conceived that opportunity to step away from my life. She was, our age, I think she was in her mid-30s. She stepped away from her life, quit her job, and just wanted to see the world. And so Mitch and I immediately began trying to scheme up how we could do that too. And obviously, as you know, it takes a lot of logistics to kind of extract yourself from your life. But we really felt like it was something that we were passionate about. We felt like our son was at a great age and we wanted to do it together as a family. So doors just continued to open to make it happen for us to take leaves of absence from our job, to rent our house, and Luke's school was really supportive, so we were able to homeschool him while we traveled. So it was a desire that we really pursued, but we felt very thankful that all those doors opened and we were able to make it happen.
And how long was it from the point where you guys had that experience and you started thinking about it to the point of actually like jumping on the plane and leaving?
It was literally 1 year. So we went to Chile in November of 2014. I hope I get my years right. And then in 2015, November, departing to travel for 9 months. So it was about a year.
Wow, that's amazing. That must have been so much work to get all of that organized.
It was a lot of work, but I felt like it was happening so naturally that it was just meant to be. I mean, literally, my husband's biggest hurdle, he felt like, was the house, because we own a house here in Athens, and he said, we need to find someone to rent. But it wasn't like we could broadcast that because we weren't really ready to tell the world that we were thinking about this idea. And a friend approached me in the hallway at church one Sunday and said they were ready to renovate their house. Did we know of any rentals? They hadn't been able to find one that they really liked. So it was truly like meant to be, because within 2 weeks, they had agreed to rent our house for 9 months. So they were friends. We knew them. It was all very smooth. And things just continued to work that way. I think I'm a big believer in open doors and closed doors. And when those doors keep opening, we just kept walking through them. And, and so even though it was a year, it sounds pretty quick. It all came together very smoothly.
And was 9 months, how did you guys settle on that being the time frame for the trip?
Well, some of it had to do with my son's school. So we knew that he was probably going to miss one grade of school. And then it also had to do with our friends that wanted to rent our house. They needed a house to live in for 9 months. We had always debated between 6 and 9 months. But then when we landed on 9, when that was their need, and literally we got home on a Monday and they had moved into their new house 2 days before. So it was perfect timing. They had it just the right amount of time.
Wow, that worked out so well. It really sounds like it was meant to be for you guys.
It was. It surely was.
So I'm curious what your son's impressions were when you guys, I don't know if it was a conversation or when you first presented the idea to him, because I think like at 7 years old, he's, he's in school for at least probably like 2 years at that point. He's got like a group of friends. What were his thoughts when you first presented him with the idea?
Yes. Well, he loves to travel. Because we love to travel, we started taking him internationally when he was about 4. So he had been on several trips abroad and really had taken to traveling, which was one of the other reasons we felt like we could do it. I think if your kids aren't adaptable, then it might be a struggle, but he was always up for it. So we sat him down just a few days before his second grade year started and said, this is an opportunity we want to do as a family. And we're going to get to see some amazing things all around the world. And we also planned to see many friends that he knew pretty well that were living overseas. So we were sprinkling that into the trip. So immediately he was super pumped. I mean, because he's an only child, we do a lot together as a family of 3, and he was just up for any adventure, and he didn't want to miss a single minute of it. So he was always very enthusiastic. And I will say he has a really positive attitude just on life in general. He's a really joyful kid. And that, bodes really well when you're traveling, because sometimes Mitch and I would get frustrated at a travel snafu or something, or even just fearful of like where we were headed and not, being a little uncomfortable. And Luke was never that way. I guess a kid's naivety really works to their advantage. And he was always just up for whatever we were doing, always saw the bright side of things. So he was a great little traveler to have with us.
That's amazing. That sounds like such a fun adventure to have with him.
Yes, he learned so much, and it was just really special for us as parents to be able to spend that time. I mean, I had never spent one-on-one time with my husband and my child for 9 months, day in and day out. You just, you don't get that opportunity. So it was really sweet.
Yeah, and you kind of touched on the learning part of it but from some of the other conversations we've had with, families with young children that have traveled, it seems like just the amount that kids can learn when they're thrown into different contexts over, whether it's 9 months or a year or something like that, is just extreme compared to being in school at home. You're kind of going through the motions versus like the excitement that comes from like, oh wow, people are speaking different sounds. I don't know what any of it means, or people are driving on the other side of the road here. The money's different. Like you just would learn so much stuff in a very natural way just by moving to a different location.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, with the world as your classroom, it blows your mind. I mean, like you said, every single day was a learning experience. We became huge fans of the free walking tours around the world. He learned so much, and that was great for us because he was excited to meet a tour guide. They're usually young and they love to practice their English if you're in a non-English speaking country. And so Luke would literally walk beside the tour guide and just chit chat to them between stops. And he learned a ton, not just from us, but from other people that we encountered. And like you said, he was always doing math. His job was to figure out our currency and make change and pay wherever we went when we were eating street food and things like that. He also learned a lot of, I won't say a lot, he learned some phrases in every country where we went. He became our purveyor in Italy because he always got us the best of everything when he could say, "Oh, may I please have a kilo of strawberries?" They always thought he was super cute, and I think we got a little extra because of that.
I'm sure it's just like this like little kid factor. It's like way cuter when like a 7-year-old says it versus like a 40-year-old.
Exactly, and he was really eager to jump in with 2 feet and learn all about everywhere we went. So that was a big piece for us, was to encourage his learning about different cultures, about different religions, about these amazing historic sites, these wonders of the world. So that was a big pillar of our trip, was not just for us to experience as adults, but to teach a young child to see these things in real life instead of in a book.
Yeah, it makes it so much more real. Like there's something when you're learning about it, especially like even things like historical events. Like when you are just reading about it in a book, it doesn't feel as tangible as when you can picture that place in your head, and you've met people from that place, and then you learn about the events, and then it's so much more real, and just you're able to connect to it on such a deeper level.
Yes, I think he has a much broader empathy for people around the world and understanding. And it's fantastic now when topics come up in his school, he'll say, "Oh, I went there." So he can give, more color to what the kids are learning. And, he has that real life experience to say, "Oh, yes, it was definitely that big and it felt even bigger," or whatever it is. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. And so I want to talk a little bit about, like the changes you experienced between like you and your husband, as well as like the changes you saw in your son. But I'm curious, when it came to planning, like how did you guys decide where you guys wanted to go? Did you kind of like plan the whole 9 months, or did you plan a couple months and then pick from there? Or what was that process like?
My husband and I went away separately and sort of built out our ideal itinerary. And then we met back together and saw what overlapped. And one of our main goals of the trip was to travel slowly. We felt like, especially with a child, but really just to learn how to live in different cultures, that we did not want to be complete tourists and travel fast. We wanted to live, and we stayed for weeks at a time in places. We stayed in Airbnbs. We shopped at local stores so that we could get that sense of what it was like to live there. So that kind of limits your itinerary, as strange as it is to think 9 months. Wow, we've got the world at our feet. It's like, how do we narrow that down? So we also chose to chase summer. So we looked at the globe and we traveled west and decided on 18 countries, and everything wasn't planned out in the full 9 months. We had a general direction and a general sense of where we were going, but we did add things along the way. When I started studying Southeast Asia and realized that Angkor Wat was right between Thailand and Vietnam, we had not considered going to Cambodia, but I thought, well, this is crazy. We have to go to Cambodia. It's right there. So things like that along the way were added in. But for the most part, we had our route planned out in advance.
So where was the very first stop you made on the trip?
We traveled from Atlanta to New Zealand via San Francisco and Sydney. So we really only had one super long flight. It was 22 hours down to New Zealand, and we spent our first month in New Zealand and Australia. And then we traveled to Southeast Asia, spent several months in Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, and Hong Kong. We were pretty excited. My husband, Mitch, is very strategic and as our travel guru. He sort of owned the transportation piece, and I owned the kind of activities piece, the excursions. And so he got us to Hong Kong for Chinese New Year, which was very special. And then from Hong Kong, we went to India. And then from there, we went down to Africa and spent time in Kenya and Egypt. And then the second half of our trip was in Turkey, Croatia, and then several countries in Western Europe. And we ended our trip in England before
Wow. Yeah. It's you started and ended in English speaking countries. I love it.
We did. And that was strategic as well. You know, we really wanted to ease our way into the international travel. And I thought if we jump right into Southeast Asia, none of us had ever been there before. We would get pretty overwhelmed. And we have really good friends that are expats living in Melbourne. So they, of course, wanted us to come visit them. And we said, let's just start in the English speaking countries. Everything will still be very different, but not quite so different for us. And then we can ease our way into the more, different cultures of Thailand and all the rest of Asia. So that was very intentional. And we ended in England because that was where my husband and I lived for 2 years abroad. And we just adore it and really wanted to spend the month of July was our last month traveling. And it's just a fantastic month to be in England. So we were there for 5 weeks right at the end of our trip.
Amazing. I was just thinking about our first trip that Ryan and I did together, and we actually had the reverse. We started in England and we ended in New Zealand.
Oh, that's great. Yes. I mean, you can go either way, you know?
Yeah. Just kind of ironic that we had different countries along the middle, but that's just kind of ironic that we did that kind of backwards. But I feel like there is something about, arriving somewhere, and especially like, England or New Zealand, you're experiencing jet lag regardless. And it's like, you're adapting to living out of, a suitcase or a backpack or, a smaller bag. You're adapting to living in an Airbnb, so somebody else's space, essentially making that your own. And it's so nice to come in and be able to still speak the language while you're dealing with all these other things to begin with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Our first stop was in Auckland, New Zealand, and we stayed there for a week with literally no itinerary. It was all about just getting over that jet lag, walking the streets of the neighborhood and going to the grocery store and, navigating without a vehicle, and just sort of readjusting our pace of life. We had given all of these activities, all of our responsibilities away, and traveling with just one carry-on suitcase and one small backpack, you realize what you really need and what you don't. And so for us, it was just a great place to start simplifying our lives and kind of refocus on this 9 months and what our goals were for that.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, and so did you go in with like very intentional goals that you wanted to, or things that you wanted to work on over the course of the trip?
Well, like I said, I think the biggest things for us were just being a family together, that intentional time with our child, and doing that slowly and simply. So we did, like I said, a lot of walking tours. We started renting bicycles in a lot of different cities and just taking long bike rides. Obviously we didn't watch any television. We didn't have, we read books, but we were really just spending time together, playing games. And that was a huge goal of ours, was to kind of get back to the simple things in life and reconnect as a family of 3. So that was a big goal. We also did a lot of volunteering on the trip. Sorry. I would say the second big goal for us was not to just be tourists, but to live in a culture and give back to where we were going, to feel like we were making a difference, even if it was just in a small way. So we had several volunteer opportunities that we purposefully built into the trip along the way. And that was good for us because, we didn't want it to feel like a big, long vacation. And because we weren't working, we wanted to put effort into something that was meaningful. So the volunteering was a great way to do that. And it was something that Luke could do with us.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm curious, like one of the things that we've experienced through travel is, being able to spend time together as a couple. And it's like more time than most people get to spend together with their significant other or their partner. And I know you touched on that, this 9 months was a chance for you and your husband to spend time together with your son. And it's this like uninterrupted time that you've never really had before. What do you feel like are the biggest things that you've learned like from having that time together?
Well, I think it's, not all is rosy and sweet. I think when you are a family of three, and even if you're just traveling with your spouse, you have to recognize that there still is an important time to be apart, because I think day in and day out, you do realize, wow, we are together a lot. And we, my husband and I have always, while we've been living at home, we've always had a date night on a regular basis. We love to spend time, just the two of us together. And that wasn't really possible when we were traveling until the very end, when we met up with my mom, came to meet us, and we met up with some friends. So because we couldn't spend time alone as a couple, except for when Luke was in bed at night, we started having some alone time because we realized that you kind of need that to recharge when you're together 24/7. So Mitch was really generous. He let me go out, for half a day or a full day, just to kind of spend some time alone to quiet and maybe do or see something that they weren't interested in doing. That was a great thing too, because Mitch and Luke are very much into cars and vehicles, and they would want to go to the science museum, and it was great for me to say, you know what, you guys go do that today. Mom's going to go read her book in a coffee shop. So it was good to recharge and recognize that we didn't have to be together all the time, that it was actually healthy for us to spend some time apart as well. But we all certainly grew incredibly close. I think when you're in that intensity of travel, when you're, going through those moments of airports and unfamiliar locations and just figuring out those logistics of travel, that intense pressure kind of brings you together as a team. And we were definitely a team on this trip. I don't know if you guys feel that way too. We kind of were like, it's us against the world. We can do this, So
Yeah. I think we can definitely relate to that. It's like, I don't know, especially being in places where, people might be trying to steal your stuff or scam you or sell you something you don't need. And you're kind of like on the lookout for your possessions and yourself. And it's kind of just like, that like, petty argument about where we're going to have dinner or, whatever it is just doesn't really matter when you like need to take care of yourself and kind of fend for yourself in this environment.
Right. And I will say, on a positive note, while of course you have your guard up, as a smart traveler should, anywhere you go, we were amazed. And one of my biggest takeaways was just how kind people were. There were hardly any instances where we were truly fearful. And just people everywhere we went were interested in us, and they were willing to help us. Like if we had questions, they would stop and answer them and talk to Luke just with genuine kindness. So I think that was really encouraging for me to see, with all the bad news that we hear about in the media and, what the outer world looks like. It seems big and scary, but it's not at all. It was actually, very, very friendly. We felt very welcomed everywhere we went.
Yeah, we've had, the same experiences as well. I think it's like going into a country that maybe we've heard about on the news or, other people have warned us about or something like that. Going into it a little bit like, okay, we need to like watch our possessions and like be careful and be cautious and that sort of thing. We find, even it's like what we were talking about before we started the recording, like with Mexico, people sent us articles about, people dying and all these like bad things happening. And we're not experiencing any of that. We're experiencing kindness from strangers when we're struggling with our Spanish. We're experiencing really great food, great culture. Like, everything has been really good and people have been really helpful and kind to us.
Yeah, I think that's really good for people to know, if they have a fear of travel. I think it's encouraging to know that you shouldn't be afraid, that, besides just the regular know-how of travel safety, that the world is not a scary place. It's actually very friendly and welcoming. And they love to see people traveling to their country. People were thrilled in Vietnam to see us, which I was a bit intimidated. I thought, well, they don't want Americans here because of our history, but it was exactly the opposite. Everyone was very welcoming, so joyful, want to get to know us, and were very, very gracious hosts.
Yeah, that's amazing to experience. I'm curious, what do you feel like some of your like top experiences from your trip were?
Yes. Well, I'm sure you get this asked all the time. He's like, what is your favorite place in the world? And it's literally impossible to answer. But when we were coming home, we told our son, we're like, look, everyone's going to ask. So at least come up with a top three. So all of us have our top three. And my personal top three were the Great Barrier Reef. We went snorkeling and diving on a budget overnight excursion. And it was phenomenal. Just the beauty of that and the experience of being out on a boat. And it was our son's first time ever snorkeling and his first excursion on our journey. So to see him embrace that and feel uncomfortable, but then get comfortable with it and really thrive in that environment was fun. So we all loved the Great Barrier Reef. And then, as I said, Vietnam to me was a surprising top three. My husband really wanted to go, and I was a bit hesitant. Just it seemed very foreign. I didn't know a lot about it except for what we as Americans had learned from the war, and I just didn't think they would be very welcoming. And it was completely blew me away. We started in the city of Hoi An, which I'm not sure if you guys have been there, but it became my favorite city in the entire country. It's gorgeous. It's historic. It's beautiful. We rode bikes everywhere. The food is just, I mean, you can't even describe how good the food is. And the people were fantastic. So we just had a really, really positive experience in Vietnam, and I loved it so much more than I thought I would. And then I would say probably
the food is so good.
Yes. The food. I mean, and everything is so cheap. You know, we ate $1 banh mi's every day that were phenomenal. I would say my other top three was our experience in Kenya. We volunteered at an orphanage just outside of Nairobi. And again, the people, you know, to connect with people and see such love and joy in a place that has had a lot of sadness was just, you know, a lot of times when you volunteer, I think you receive more than you're even giving to the other people. And that was certainly the case for me at this orphanage. It's called First Love. And the children were just phenomenal. We just enjoyed spending time with them and loving on them and getting to know them. And so that to me was definitely one of my top three.
Amazing. It sounds like you've had some incredible experiences throughout your trip.
We really did. It was, you know, I won't say it was once in a lifetime because I know we'll do something like it again, but it was every experience was even the ones that weren't necessarily our favorite stops. Those experiences, you know, fed into the larger whole of the experience, and the entire thing was really phenomenal.
When you started to approach the end of it, were you guys feeling like you were excited and ready to go back to Georgia, or that you kind of wanted to stay international and keep traveling?
You know, it was slightly a mix of both. I could have definitely stayed and continued traveling. I think I was ready for a little bit of consistency and normalcy. So if someone had said, oh, why don't you go settle in, you know, some country for 6 months, I would have said, absolutely, I don't need to go home. But I think we were ready to stop packing our bags every week and, you know, have our own pillows and our own beds to sleep in for a while. You know, those things were very great to come home to. And we love the town that we live in. Athens, Georgia is phenomenal. It's a great place to raise a family and to live. So we were excited to see all of our family and friends since it had been so long. But at the same time, it was very bittersweet. Luke cried on the flight home and was just so sad that the experience was over. But at the same time, he was crying because my dad was waiting for us at the airport. So he was so excited to see him. So it was really a paradox of excitement and sadness.
Yeah, oh, that's really cute about Luke. I can definitely relate to that feeling, though. I always kind of have those feelings on flight home as well. It's like an emotional time to like get on that final flight when you know you're going back home, because it's like, you know, somebody's picking you up from the airport, and it's usually somebody that you really care about. So it's like you get to see loved ones, you get to see family, you get to see friends, you get to eat at your favorite restaurants again. But then it's also like closing, you know, the chapter of a part of your life as well, because you're not going to have that exact experience ever again.
Right. It's so true. It's so true. And, you know, we knew that gosh, early on in the trip, we said, we will do this again for sure. Actually, when we were snorkeling in the Great Barrier Reef, Luke only snorkeled because he had to be 12 years old to dive. And he looked at us right away and said, well, we're coming back then when I'm 12. I mean, we have to. So we were already planning round two, even at the beginning of the trip. So, but you're right, you know, that particular experience and that, you know, with him being that age and us doing that exact itinerary will never happen again. And it was super special. So it's kind of hard to end.
Yeah, definitely. I'm curious, you know, looking at who Luke was as a person before you guys set out on this adventure, and then looking at the way that he's grown since the travels, what do you feel like have been some of the biggest like growths for him, or ways that he's grown?
You know, I think it's just really opened his eyes to the world around him. It was really important for us to show him that we are very blessed where we live. We live in a lovely community. He goes to a fantastic private school, but that not everyone around the world is as privileged, but that's okay because they live in beautiful places. They are people just like us. And it was great for him to understand and actually be able to see and feel and touch that instead of just hear it from my mouth. You know, I mean, it's one thing to say, oh, we sponsor a child at this orphanage in Kenya and we're providing for them. But then for him to actually get to play with them and to see where they sleep and to see where they live and go to school, I think really impacted him probably in ways that he doesn't even realize yet. I mean, he's about to turn 10 and we still have very deep conversations about the world as a whole and his point of view. And we ask him questions and we try to think about, you know, those experiences and relive them so that he doesn't forget all the different impacts that he had, you know, during that time.
What was it like for him to go from a year homeschooling? I'm assuming a much more like whether maybe self-driven type of education back into school when you guys got back to Georgia?
It blows my mind how resilient kids are. He did a great job jumping back in. You know, he was excited to see his friends again, and he loves to learn. So I think probably the biggest challenge for him was getting back into a classroom where he wasn't the only student. You know, like he wanted to talk and about everything, and we had to remind him, hey, you can't answer every question. You need to raise your hand and wait to be called on. So really the structure of the classroom was probably the biggest challenge. But he really reintegrated more beautifully than I could have imagined. I was a little bit worried just because, you know, we had been on the move and to have to go back to sitting in a classroom could be hard. But he did a fantastic job. He probably did a better job than I did. So,
yeah, I mean, that brings up another topic. What was it like for you and for Mitch to go back into your jobs after this experience?
You know, I think we were very blessed. We were able to get jobs right when we got home. Mitch went back to work with his same company, and I took a job with a different company, but just a few weeks after we got home. And I think that sometimes the daily routine and the monotony was hard to get used to. We were so used to things changing and having all of this new stimuli all the time. But I think that's one of the reasons I decided to write the book. When we were reliving our stories and talking to people about what we had experienced, I think it was sort of cathartic for me to write it down and really reflect on all that we had learned, not just as a family, but really practical things like our travel tips that we had picked up. People were asking us all the time, where should we go? What did you learn? What was your favorite place? You know, so for me to be able to spend time reliving all of that through our journals and through reading our travel blog, I think that kind of helped me reintegrate because I didn't really let it go. I was still reliving it. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I can relate to the feeling of like coming back and jumping into a job and just feeling kind of like, I don't know. It's like it's a hard transition in a lot of ways. Like there's something nice about getting into a routine and knowing how your day is going to go. And I feel like that can be really like nice for life. But then it's also kind of like this craving for the uncomfortable and to have more of that like stimulus of a big new city and, sleeping somewhere different and that sort of thing.
Exactly. And I think if you love to travel, then that's just part of who you are and it's in your blood. I've always enjoyed that new experience. I think for some people that don't like to travel, that's very scary and uncomfortable for them, and they don't really want to put themselves in that place. But I totally do. I love that. So yes, for us, a big challenge coming home was continuing to push ourselves out of our comfort zone, even here at home. So we made some goals for ourselves when we were spending that last month in England. We sat down and sort of talked about what we had learned and what we wanted to take home with us. And a lot of that was changing our lives at home, making them more simple. We have activity-itis here, and there's so much going on that are all fun things, but we tend to overcommit, and then we're so busy we just aren't even enjoying ourselves. And so we scaled back quite a bit. Luke does not do as many activities and sports. We say no as a family to certain invitations that would probably be fantastic, but we realize that we just need to spend time together alone as a family and do something simple like take a bike ride. So those were some things that we really realized on the journey that needed to be a part of our life all the time. And we do continue to volunteer here, and we always have a trip on the books. I love to know that we are headed somewhere new and different, even if it's in 6 months, that we can research and think about and talk about and look forward to.
Yeah, I feel like you touched on something really important there with, integrating the things that you've learned from travels into your life. I know that on our first trip, Ryan and I both kept travel journals, and the very back of my travel journal was this list of things that I wanted, out of my life back home. And when we started the podcast, so this was in coming back at the end of 2011, beginning of 2012. And then when we started the podcast, halfway through 2014, when we got back from South America, I pulled out that journal for the first time since I'd written in it to go through all these travel experiences to be able to recap for the podcast. And I came across this page and I was so shocked by the thoughts that I'd written down and how little I'd actually incorporated those into my life. So I feel like it's easy to get kind of sucked back into your regular routine if you're not intentional about it, for sure.
Absolutely. Yes. We made a list of 10 family goals, and they were simple things like go on 3 family picnics or go on 4 family bike rides and see 2 sunsets. I mean, we never stop and watch the sunset here where we live, but we had done that so often on our trip that we knew that it would be a goal and a challenge for us to kind of integrate that back into our everyday life.
Yeah, it's amazing how something so simple as a sunset, which is, totally like, it's like a bucket list item in a lot of different places. Sunrises and sunsets are like highlights of so many different travel experiences. And yet it's like so rare that we just sit down and watch the sunset while we're at home.
Yes, I agree. I was driving my son to school just this morning and he wanted to get there early. And so we were driving as the sun was rising and he was like, "Oh, look, Mom, we haven't seen a sunrise in a really long time." So that was kind of sweet.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, we rarely get up for the sunrise. Or maybe I should say not we.
I know. I'm more of a sunset girl.
So I know you mentioned you were writing a travel blog along the way. Where did you first start getting the idea about making or writing a book? And what were the kind of steps from like, oh, that would be cool to, okay, I'm actually going to do this?
Right. Well, the travel blog was really just a chance for our family and friends to follow along with us. And we actually, all 3 of us, entered into the travel blog. So that was part of Luke's schooling, was to write posts and things like that. And I never really intended on writing a book. I'm in the business of public relations, so I write short form, but I've never ever thought I could write a whole book until we started having all of these really cool experiences and learnings, just about, how we had figured things out along the way from a travel perspective and practical travel to just these learnings about how we were able to connect with volunteer organizations and things like that. So toward the end of the trip, I realized I would really like to have our experience as a memoir for our family. And then also when people were asking us about it, people wanted us to share that for us. So I built an outline in about month 7 or 8 of our trip, and just started thinking about what that book would look like. And obviously with these countries that we traveled to, it made for a nice outline of, going all the way around the world. But over the months that we moved home and I was able to reflect, it's almost like you have to get out of the situation to look back on it and say, oh, wow, that's where we learned how important it was to do this. Or, that family was so impactful to us because that's when we realized that, a local experience is way more important than a touristy one. So once I came home, I really dug in and started reliving the trip, but also applying all those learnings to it. And before I knew it, it became a book. So I call it more than a memoir because it is our stories. It's our highs and our lows. It's the things we learned, but it's practical too. If you're interested in traveling to any countries, I've got trip tips at the end of every chapter that were things we learned along the way. And then in the back, I've created an entire recommendation guide, country by country, of all of our favorite things we did, places we stayed, places we ate, and all the websites. So if you wanted to go to Croatia, say, you could certainly read the chapters on that and our stories on that, but then see those practical tips and recommendations. So,
yeah, I love the combination of, stories, because I feel like stories can really connect people to a place, but then also the practicality of okay, you're planning a trip there. This is where we ate and this is what we really liked about this restaurant, or this is where we stayed, etc.
Right. It was a lot of research. And so I thought we need to share these favorites with everyone because they weren't all great. There were definitely some hits and misses. And so I thought, if we found something awesome in this country or this city, let's share it.
Yeah, no, I love that. I feel like that was kind of my experience as well, and how my travel blog kind of turned into The World Wanders, I guess you could say. It's our first trip, I felt like I was just sending a lot of emails to people, and correspondence was really challenging and time consuming. Second time around, I was like, I'm just going to write a public blog so that all my family and friends can know what's going on. And then from there, we're we have so much travel experience. We should be sharing this with other people who are planning trips and wanting to have these experiences.
Yeah, that's what I love about the travel community. I mean, when we were first doing our research, the websites that we came across and the blogs that we came across, I think people, when they love to travel, they want to share those experiences and let people in on those secrets. It's not a secret. Please go do this because we did it and it was awesome. So that's what I love about the travel community. It's very cohesive and encouraging. And so, yeah, we learned a lot from other people. And I definitely give a lot of people credit in the book that came up with ideas that we used and that we found successful.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And so what is the name of the book and where can people go if they want to purchase it?
Yes. Well, the name of the book is From the Rut to the Ledge. So it's a play on our last name, Rutledge. My cousin actually came up with it for our travel blog because that was our goal, was to get out of our comfortable rut and to push ourselves onto the ledge and out of our comfort zone. So it's the name of the book is From the Rut to the Ledge, and you can get it on Amazon or barnesandnoble.com. And our website is still, our blog is still out there, and I post content to it, and it is ruttotheledge.com.
Amazing. Have you found that you've continued to write on your blog since you've gotten home, or is that kind of dropped off since you guys haven't been traveling as much? What has that experience been like?
Yes, definitely less content since I'm at home, but I do have a list of blog posts that I have in my queue. Just really more practical, helpful things on traveling. But every time we do take a trip, I try to write a blog post about it. We went to Belize for spring break last spring, and it was a great experience. And so I did a blog post about that because it's easily accessible from Atlanta. I think a lot of our locations for our friends anyway, they think, oh gosh, I don't know if I'm ever going to make it to Vietnam. But I like to also write about places that are close by. You don't have to travel all the way around the world to experience something amazing and different. And so that was one of the reasons that I wanted to keep blogging, was to let people know that, you don't have to take a trip all the way around the world. If you only have 2 weeks, you can go and do something, out of your comfort zone and on the ledge, just, on your family vacation.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that is, people that do think you have to go so far. And like, we actually flew from Atlanta down to Mexico City, and it's absolutely amazing. Like, we were able to get there with 5 hours with a layover in Houston. And it's like, it doesn't have to be a 22-hour flight or a 10-hour flight, halfway across the world. Like, you can go to places that are different from your own culture in just a couple of hours.
Exactly.
And so you guys took a trip to Belize this past year, I think you said. And then what's next for you guys?
Yeah, so we've got a few trips on the books. We are going to California for Thanksgiving week. We're going to visit Southern California, see some friends in San Diego and LA and Santa Barbara. And then Mitch and I are going on an adults-only trip down to Bonaire after Christmas. It's an island that's known for its snorkeling and diving, just north of South America. So we're going to spend a week there. And then we are going back to Kenya, to the orphanage next March. We've booked a trip to go back and see all those sweet kids and spend a week with them. And then we're going to tack on some time in Tanzania to do a safari to the Ngorongoro crater. So those are our trips on the books at the moment.
Wow. That all sounds amazing. We've still got to get over to Africa.
It's pretty phenomenal. There's no other place like it, and the people are truly amazing. They're just so glorious. So we're excited to get back there.
Yeah, that's amazing. Awesome. So people have your website and your book. Where else can they go to find you online?
Yes, you can follow me on Instagram. It's Suzanne Rutledge. I'm on Instagram and Facebook. And then, like I said, the blog is ruttotheledge.com. And it's got all the information, all of our blog posts about our travels around the world and information about the book.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll put a link to the book as well as a link to your blog and your social media in the show notes. Suzanne, it's been such a pleasure chatting with you today. Thanks so much for taking the time to talk with us.
Oh, gosh, it was my pleasure. It's so great to meet you guys, to talk to you. I love following where you are. So always love connecting with people in the travel community. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Suzanne. To find more information, relevant links, and photos talked about in this week's episode, check out theworldwanderers.com.
If you have a question, comment, or feedback, send us an email at info@theworldwanderers.com. Join our community on Facebook at The World Wanderers or on Twitter at WorldWanderers1. As always, thanks so much for listening.
Have a great day.
Bye.